Chapter 11. The masked man tightened his grip. "Listen, kid. Get the hawk if you value your life and the Hardys." "All right," said Chet. I'll do it." The masked man pushed Chet along until they were close to the small door in the barn, then turned him loose and darted into the darkness of the barn, closing the door behind him. Chet walked towards the Hardys with trembling legs. As Frank and Joe explained the plans to Simon, Chet interrupted, saying, "Sounds swell. Mind if I hold the Falcon on the trip?" "The bird isn't accustomed to you," Frank said. "She won't respond to your commands." "Well, can I at least hold her until we spot the pigeons?" Chet pleaded. Frank and Joe exchanged puzzled glances. Then both sensed something was wrong with Chet, for he was not usually so nervous. "That wouldn't work too well either," Frank told him. Chet cast an anxious glance over his shoulder in the direction of the barn, then stared at the hooded Falcon. She was standing quietly in Joe's gauntlet. He was checking the jets to make certain that they were firmly fastened. Then he unsnapped the swivel hook so that he could release the Falcon quickly. Suddenly Chet dived at Joe and grabbed the bird. With a startled cry, Joe stepped back, and the Falcon flapped her wings to hold her balance. Frank clutched the stout boy's arm. "What is wrong with you, Chet? You're acting as though you've gone crazy. This bird can be ruined if she's disturbed. You mustn't make a pass at her like that. Move gently and slowly, or she will bite off the hand." Finally, Chet decided the Hardys must be told about the threat. He glanced again at the barn, then said in a low, hoarse whisper, "Listen, fellas, a masked man stopped me in the barn a couple of minutes ago and ordered me to get the Falcon from you. He told me to leave it inside the barn. I don't know if your lives and mine will be worth a nickel." Simon, who had heard Chet's explanation, leaned out of the cockpit in amazement and said, "Trouble? Can I help?" Frank and Joe were grim, realizing the only way out was through a ruse. "You sure can," Frank told the pilot. "We'll give the hawk to Chet. He can take his time about getting into the barn. In the meantime, Joe and I will pretend we've gone off with you in the helicopter, but we'll sneak out the other side, double back, and try to nab this guy, and anyone who might be with him." Joe helped Chet put on the gauntlet. Then he switched the Falcon to the youth's wrist and handed him the other end of the leash. In a low voice he called, "Good luck," as though Chet had asked to borrow the Falcon for an afternoon of hunting. Simon jumped to the ground, and the Hardys entered the passenger compartment. Then, while Chet and the pilot stood close together beside the copter to hide any view from underneath the craft, Frank and Joe quickly slipped out the far side and took cover in back of some bushes. From there they made their way towards the barn as the copter rose and headed towards the woods. Chet, who had started for the barn, was having trouble with the Falcon. She bobbed up and down on his wrist, turned towards the throbbing sound of the rotor of the helicopter, and flew out of the end of the leash several times. Chet, however, managed to get her to the barn. He rolled open the big door and placed the bird inside. "Pretty rough on the hawk," Frank whispered to Joe, "but I guess Chet is scared plenty too." The frightened boy turned and hurried to the house. After he had climbed the rear steps and slammed the kitchen screen door behind him, the masked man slipped out of the barn with the hawk under his arm. Instantly the Hardys were upon him, and the shrill whistle from Joe. Chet dashed back on the double. As Joe took the hawk, Frank pinned the prisoner to the ground and ripped off the mask. Ruse, the first mate from the Daisy case, stared sullenly at the boy. "Well," said Frank grimly, as he let the sailor up, but kept hold of him, "suppose you talk?" You threatened me and the Hardys," Chet growled. "That was just to make you get the hawk," Ruse answered. He watched Joe sullenly as he took the gauntlet from Chet and wristed the Falcon. "I know someone who will pay me well for a trained bird," Ruse went on. "You'll have to give a better reason than that," Frank told him. "How did you know we would have the Falcon out here?" I was hiding in the backyard this afternoon and overheard you making plans to bring the bird here." I've told you all I know," the sailor insisted. "It will go easier on you if you tell the truth," Frank said. "What do you know about the smuggling and kidnapping racket around here?" Ruse winced, but remained silent. Joe burst out, "I'm sure you can tell plenty about Captain Font and the Daisy K." The sailor's muscles twitched nervously. "Let me go," he shouted. "I don't know anything." The boys marched the man to the kitchen. Frank and Joe kept a close watch on him while Chet went to the phone and called Chief Colleague. "Tell him," Frank said, "that we have a prisoner for him. He can book Ragoo for assault on you today, and Joe the other day, and attempts to steal the Falcon." The group waited until they saw the Bayport patrol car pulling into the Morton driveway. Then, with Frank and Joe holding the sailor firmly by the arms, they started towards the police car. Chief Colleague and Patrolman Smuff climbed out. As they eyed the Hawk, Frank explained the circumstances of the capture and told Smuff that Ragoo was the thief they had been looking for. Before Smuff or the chief had a chance to comment, Frank suddenly cried out, "Joe, there's a pigeon!" "It's winging from the same direction as the other ones we spotted. Let the hawk loose." Hearing this, Ragoo began to cry out oaths in his native language. The Hardys were sure he must know the pigeon was carrying a message. Joe unhooded the Falcon. She spotted the pigeon, took off into the air, and climbed towards it. "Chief, I'm sure Ragoo is guilty of a lot more than he's admitting," Joe said. "It seems that way," the officer said. "We'll be in to prefer charges against him sometime tonight," Frank said. "Good enough," Chief Colleague agreed. Smuff hustled Ragoo into the patrol car, and the three rode off. The boys shaded their eyes. We're following the flight of the bird. The peregrine and its prey had moved off over the woods, and a moment later the pigeon was lost to view. The Hardy's heart sank. Had the bird escaped?